Welcome back to GaleForceWins Season 3.
The GaleForceWins podcast is proudly sponsored by the Newfoundland and Labrador Construction Association. The NLCA provides unparalleled opportunities for its members through industry education, construction information, government advocacy, and networking events. The NLCA is building Newfoundland and Labrador. For more information, visit nlca.ca.
Well, folks, here we are. We're in front of the courthouse. We have a very, very important guest today. It's someone who is within my family, and I'm very pleased to present Amber. Amber's going to introduce herself and talk a little bit about this wonderful new business. Amber, go ahead and introduce yourself. First name, last name, a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Thank you, Jerry, so much. I am Amber Dechief. I originate from Saskatchewan. I was born and raised there, and I moved to St. John's, Newfoundland about 4 years ago. I moved here for work, and so I used to work for an oil and gas supplier, and then I had a job at a tech company, and then I have been recently unemployed, and so in January, I needed something to work on. I don't do well not having a project on the go, not having things to do, and so I decided to create a huge tour to basically showcase Newfoundland to my friends and family, most of the St. John's area. And so I dove deep into the research, into all the historic sites around and the history behind the development of St. John's and Newfoundland. And then I decided in almost like late March, that I should condense it into essentially an hour-and-a-half walking tour and offer it this summer. So this way I'm able to present my findings. I sound like a researcher. I'm able to present my findings to people of St. John's, locals and tourists alike, and really share what makes this place so special.
Well, you know what, Amber, it's kudos to you. One of the things that I find interesting is, GaleForceWins came out of a layoff. I personally was laid off, and you know what? You don't realize that inspirational things tend to happen when you're challenged the most. So. Yeah. Good on you for doing this, and we have, the family, everyone is behind you. One thing else I'd like to say is that I find that someone's perspective, like yourself, growing up in Estevan, Saskatchewan, showcasing this incredible city, your perspective is different, and I think that's very valuable. Talk a little bit about, what you see about St. John's that intrigues you.
Oh my goodness, what is there? It is such a beautiful and unique place. So I always say that the people of St. John's and Newfoundland are like salt of the earth. They are so kind and generous and caring. And it's not just to the people that they know, but also to people from away, like me. I was very easily welcomed into the community here and very easily found my kind of place in St. John's society. And so it's really a wonderful place to live. But also the history is just so interesting, and it's just so fascinating. I think Newfoundland and St. John's has had, over the last 500 years, they've had so much almost reinvention of themselves as a society, as an economy, as a group of people. And so it's really interesting to look at what lessons have been learned throughout major things that happen that you'll learn on the tour, and how it really poises the people of St. John's and the society to move forward in a way that's really interesting and innovative. Like, there are so many really creative and innovative people here in St. John's, and I think it's from this mentality of having to adapt and learn as, big tragic things happen throughout history.
So tell us a little bit about the tour itself. We have some people waiting, families waiting to go on the tour. Tell us a little bit about, outline the tour for us briefly.
All right. So it is starting June 2nd. It'll be every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 10 a.m. We meet here at the courthouse. It is free because I really want to encourage people to come on the tour, learn a little bit about St. John's. And tips are welcome to help compensate my time and my expenses. And it's about an hour-and-a-half tour. We do 3 kilometers, about 6 flights of stairs. And we really go through the history of Newfoundland and sort of the major things that have happened throughout our history that have kind of defined Newfoundland and St. John's as a place and changed the course of our society. So it's kind of a historical but also cultural tour.
So we're going to start at the courthouse, and I'm going to move over here. It was distracting Amber earlier. I'm trying to show a little bit of where we are. So we're going to walk that way.
We're going to walk all the way to Terry Fox.
That's the east. We're going to walk east to Terry Fox, and then we're going to go where?
And then we're going to go north to Toslow Restaurant.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go up to Gower Street, and then to the Anglican Church, that's right there, and then down back to the courthouse. And there's an extension that I offer sometimes, depending on how interested the group is, where we go to Murray Premises, and then up to Water Street, and we end at George Street.
So there you have it, folks. This is a free walking tour, but obviously Amber's in this to, this is something that's got a lot of value. So when you get on this tour, you say tips are welcome.
Tips are greatly appreciated.
How do people get a hold of you? That's the last thing I want to mention.
Oh, yes. I have my Instagram, my Facebook, my YouTube. They're all Come From Away Adventures. You can find me on Google. There's a pin right here at the courthouse, Come From Away Adventures. And my email is comefromawayadventures@gmail.com. As somebody who is a come from away, we're going to have a great adventure together.
Well, there you have it, folks. Amber Dechief, she has a new business started. We at GaleForceWins love new businesses. Let's give out a shout out for Amber, and recommend your friends to come on this tour. Thanks,
Thank you
Amber.
so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're very excited for you.
I'm excited to have you on tour. Hopefully you learned something. Now, during World War II, unfortunately, St. John is not mapped out linearly, so we kind of have to jump forward and back in time. But during World War II, the threat of invasion by the Germans in Newfoundland was a very real, very scary thought for most Newfoundlanders. So the population of Newfoundland was really quite small, and they had lots of, it's not raining that bad. They had lots of minerals here, and they were also the most furthest east island, most furthest east point in North America. So it was a great place for Germany to attack and invade, and then use it as almost a launching point to attack the rest of North America. So the US, Canadian, and UK forces were really concerned about Germany attacking St. John's and capturing the island as a foothold into the rest of North America. So during World War II, they had tons of forts and army bases all across Newfoundland and Labrador. The entire east coast of the island they still have these concrete structures that the US used to protect the harbor protect the island from potential invasion. Now, there were some attacks on Newfoundland. So in March of 1942, a German U-boat launched a torpedo into the harbor, but they missed, and they actually hit the other side of the Southside Hills. At this time, there was a torpedo net strung in between the Narrows, so the St. John's was protected from a torpedo launch, but the Germans missed, and they hit the Southside Hills, and nothing really happened. But it definitely made people more aware that the Germans could invade, and the threat was very real. They're actively looking to invade Newfoundland. In September of 1942, the Germans realized that they couldn't invade on this side. It was way too protected. So they went all the way north around the tip, and they attacked Bell Island. Bell Island had a large iron ore mine, and iron was essential for war production. So they attacked Bell Island and sunk 2 iron ore carriers. 2 months later, they did another attack and sunk another 2 iron ore carriers. So it was a really devastating loss for Newfoundland, and it further heightened the fear of imminent German invasion. The only other attack there was in essentially this part of North America during World War II was a passenger ferry from Canada to Newfoundland was sunk by a German U-boat. So thank goodness nothing ever happened, and beyond that, and there was only those 4 attacks that we know of. But it really shines a light on the fact that Newfoundland was a really important part of World War II, despite being all the way over on this side of the ocean. We just chatted about World War II, and now we're going to rewind a little bit to World War I. Newfoundland joined Canada in 1949, And so during the time of World War I and World War II, they were their own country. They were English colony, but they were, by all means, their own country. So when World War I broke out in 1914, Newfoundland was automatically joined the war effort because they were an English colony. And the Newfoundlanders signed up in droves. They were very patriotic, and they really represented their country and the English Empire very well. In 1914, the first 500 set off towards Gallipoli, which is in modern-day Turkey, and they fought alongside the Australians and the New Zealanders, and they did very well. In 1916, they moved over to the Western Front, fighting alongside the Canadians and the rest of the English and the British, and they fought in the Battle of the Somme. Now, a very important date here in Newfoundland is July 1st, 1916. And this is the Memorial Day. In the rest of Canada, July 1st is Canada Day. But here, it's extremely important to know that July 1st is first and foremost Memorial Day, and then Canada Day. And the reason is because on July 1st, 1916, the Newfoundland Regiment had to accomplish a task at Beaumont Hamel. A unit a few days before was set to challenge and conquer a hill in Beaumont Hamel, and they, by all efforts, failed. They didn't end up conquering the hill, and they had devastating losses. On July 1st, Newfoundland was given the same task. They had 800 men go over the top, and although they fought really hard and they conquered the hill, but by the next morning, there were only 68 available for roll call, which means the rest were either dead or injured. And this is absolutely devastating losses on Newfoundland as a regiment, but also as a country as a whole. It's an extremely small country, and to have a battle lose so many individuals at once is devastating. But the Newfoundlanders persevered. You have to remember that these are extremely hardy people. These are people who wake up before the crack of dawn, and they would get into their boat and row out, fish in the middle of the ocean, and fish all day in every single weather condition imaginable. Wind, rain, snow, sleet, they were out there. And they would come back home, and they would do it the next day, every single day. So for them, they're very proud people, they're very hardworking, and they were able to, these traits and these qualities and their resilience led them to become very noble and strong warriors in World War I. Not only during the Battle of Beaumont Hamel, but throughout the rest of World War I, they exceeded expectations and proved themselves to be a noteworthy fighting force. This led them to receive the Royal designation, and the regiment's now known as the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. So this is why Memorial Day is such a strong and proud holiday for so many Newfoundlanders. It's a reminder of the strength and resilience of Newfoundland when it was a young, small country, and how it really showed itself on the world stage. And also to remember, so many lives were lost in the name of defending freedom. So because of their efforts during World War I and the losses they received, during World War II, Newfoundland was concentrated on the home front, which was protecting Newfoundland. And they sent out 2 artillery units to Europe. They also had ancillary units that did logging or other non-combat tasks. And Newfoundlanders signed up with the Canadian armies and were sent over. But as a regiment, their main focus was protecting Newfoundland from German invasion and also escorting ships across the Atlantic so they could go safely. Any questions? And it's...
Where are these people behind you? What are these statues?
Yeah, so this is a memorial. And so we have a Royal Newfoundland Regiment infantry. We have a merchant marine. We have a logger. And we have the Navy on the left. And then above we have like Lady Liberty or like Miss Victory. She's like the sign of freedom. Yeah. All right, so who here during their travels has been on the Trans-Canada Highway? Yes. Amazing. So, if you'll notice, the Trans-Canada Highway, after the airport, it just kind of ends. It's just there's a sign that says end of TCH, you're now in 60 kilometers an hour, that's it. And the reason is because the Trans-Canada Highway here took a really long time to build, and it was a really long and complicated building process. And it was almost an accomplished feat itself that they actually finished. In Victoria, BC, the other end, they had a beautiful big end of TCH sign, mile zero, all of those things. But here in Newfoundland, we just have 60 kilometers an hour, end of TCH, that's it. So one of the reasons is that Newfoundland finally finished the Trans-Canada Highway 3 years after the rest of Canada in 1965, and they didn't end up paving it until 1970. And because Newfoundland had the second longest Trans-Canada Highway to build, they also had the second most difficult terrain to build over, and they had the second smallest population to pay for this. So it was an extremely expensive, extremely difficult task, and so they made it the easiest way they could, and then as time developed, they expanded it and made it a nicer highway that we know today. So the Trans-Canada Highway went through town and actually ended up here. This is mile zero of the Trans-Canada Highway. But we have Terry Fox here. Now, for all of my Canadians, we know Terry Fox as the runner of the Marathon of Hope. In 1980, he had cancer throughout his childhood. And in 1980, he started a run here to raise awareness about cancer and cancer research. And he ran all the way across Canada. He made it to Thunder Bay before having to stop his run due to his condition. This statue here is actually him dipping his foot, his prosthetic foot, into the harbor before beginning on his run. Due to 9/11, the harbor is no longer accessible, and the Trans-Canada Highway moved due to development of the city. And so this is kind of the memorial park they established to commemorate Terry Fox. And they put the Trans-Canada Mile Zero marker at City Hall, which is a little bit away. It's actually probably a kilometer from here. So that is the story of why we're here to say hello to Terry Fox, but also we're here to talk about Cabot Tower and Signal Hill. So Signal Hill is that hill on the left, the one facing the ocean. You can see there's a stone structure kind of on the left and almost like a cabin type structure on the right. So Signal Hill has been used as a signaling hill, very fitting name, been used as a signaling hill since the beginning of permanent life here in St. John's. So back in the day, they would put flags up the hill. They had a flag tower, and those flags carried messages to incoming ships. And often they carried messages to people of St. John's as well. Now, Signal Hill was also extremely important because it was a great vantage point to detect incoming advancing armies. For example, during the 7 Years' War, it was actually the battle site that changed the tides of the war. The 7 Years' War is kind of known as the War of Colonial Power in North America. At this time, there was a lot of English colonial power and French colonial power. And they kind of fought over land, but no one really was the victor until the 7 Years' War. In St. John's, in 1762, the French actually ran up Signal Hill, which is a big run. It's 80 flights of stairs up, okay? That's a big run. They ran up Signal Hill, they caught the English by surprise, and they captured Signal Hill. The French used so many forces to capture Signal Hill that they were really, really small and weak after that. But this being predominantly English military at the time, they were able to rally their forces and recapture Signal Hill, almost eliminating this portion of the French army, which really changed the tides of what the English could conquer for the rest of the 7 Years' War. Because the French were down and the English amassed more power, and obviously the confidence and bravado of winning the Battle of Signal Hill. And so that is the reason why England ended up becoming the dominant colonial force in Newfoundland, and then later on in the rest of North America. Stopped here to talk about these beautiful 4 buildings that look a little derelict. But when Signal Hill was built, in the late 1800s. It was built by a man named Samuel Garrett. And when Cabot Tower was built, he built it using stones mined from the Southside Hills, and he also used it from the destroyed St. George's Hospital. Now, after he built Cabot Tower, he had all this leftover stone. And so he decided to build these 4 buildings, these 4 houses, as gifts for his 4 daughters, and they were wedding gifts. So once his daughters got married, they were allowed to move into the house their father had built for them. These houses have tunnels that run underneath and connect all 4 of them, so the sisters could go from house to house without having to go outside. There was a number of problems with like sewer backup, and that's the reason why these houses were essentially left alone and kind of have fallen into a less desirable state. So we hope to see some new developments in the future. Resettlement has occurred naturally throughout Newfoundland history. People would essentially move somewhere, build a house, and then if they found out fishing was slightly better in a different bay, or there was a doctor that visited that community over there, or there was a school or something along those lines, they would put their house onto basically a homemade barge and float it across and put it into their new spot. And so that's how resettlement happened for years. But it was always individual led. When Newfoundland joined Canada in 1949, the Newfoundland government really wanted to modernize the Newfoundland economy and society. And one of the things they wanted to do was to reduce the number of individuals living in these extremely small, extremely isolated rural communities. So starting in 1954, they created a resettlement program where if your community voted with 90% of people voting to resettle, the head of the household will get $1,000 to pay for the cost of resettlement. That's about $10,000 today. And then people would move to essentially a larger community that had more access and more services. They were often on the rail line. Now, generally people thought it would be a great economic opportunity. There would be jobs there for them. Their kids could go to school. But it was basically a complete failure. When people resettled, they resettled to communities that didn't have a huge surplus of jobs. They didn't have space for all these people, so people had to like build homes. And there also was a school and there was medical facilities, but these quickly became overcrowded. So in general, people who resettled, they were looking at a life of unemployment or going away from their family to work in forestry or the mines. It took the average family 20 years to recover from resettlement financially. So that's an entire generation's worth of wages that basically are gone. Now, the only individuals who did better because of resettlement were elderly people who for the first time could access medical care reliably, and there were like children. So in their former communities, children had a 1 in 700 rate of graduating high school. And this was largely because there often wasn't a school, or if there was, it only went to grade 8. And kids were being pulled out from the age of 10 to 12 to 14 in order to go fishing with the family. But in these resettled communities, there was no work for them. And so children were staying in school longer, and they were also going off and working in far away from home as soon as they were able to. So the children of resettled families did far better financially than their parents did because they had more education and more opportunity. So welcome everyone to Jelly Bean Row. This is where the iconic Jelly Bean Row style houses originated. Now, when I mentioned Devon Block, those houses that survived the Great Fire, all the way up to here, and as far as you can see that way, was completely destroyed by the Great Fire of 1892. This fire was the most significant fire in St. John's history because it basically decimated the city and allowed the city to rebuild in a modern way. Now, it was July 1892, and all the way up the hill across from the central fire station, there was a barn, and we assume some guy was smoking in the barn. And the hay in the barn lit on fire. So they went across the street to the firefighters, and they said, "We got a fire in the barn." And the firefighters are like, "Okay, no worries." And they attach their hose to their tank, drag the hose across the street, and go to put out the fire. When they opened up the valve on the hose, no water came out. The tank was empty because they did a training exercise the day before and forgot to refill the tank. So the firefighters were like, "Okay, we're gonna go to the water main." So they attached their hose to the water main, like we would have fire hydrants today. And they opened up the valve, and no water came out. So the city of St. John's was doing water main work down here on Water Street. And although they finished the work that day, there wasn't enough pressure in the water in the line to drive the water up the hill to where they needed it for the fire. So at this point, they were panicking. They would run down the hill to any sort of place that had water, beer, anything, fill a bucket, run back up the hill to put it on the fire, try to get it out. And it was a lot, it's a big hill. So they weren't very efficient, and the fire spread way too quickly. Within 12 hours, a third of the city was completely gone. Standing here, everything you could see was ashes and then chimney stacks, and that's it. Only in that direction, only those 4 houses that I pointed out were visible. And so what happened was the city was absolutely destroyed, and people were now camping in the parks around the city. They were camping in tents. The Canadian and the US brought over supplies and tried to help build. And the most efficient way to get people in houses before winter hit, which here can be sometimes as early as October, November, was to build this style of house. So these are Victorian row style houses. And they're most efficient because they only require simple materials to build. You don't have to quarry stone. And they all share a wall. So you're able to build a number of houses, reducing the number of materials you need per house. So it was a really quick and efficient way to build a wide variety of houses. When they built these houses, though, they were all white. And that was the style at the time because it was the most popular paint color. The houses that you see today are beautiful, brightly colored. And this is because in the 1960s and 70s, this area was on the decline. It was no longer a nice place to live. And so people went and they started a revitalization project. So they fixed up these houses and they painted them beautiful, bright colors in order to attract more people to the neighborhood. And it worked. People absolutely loved living in a bright neighborhood. And the different colored houses trend spread all across St. John's and now all across Newfoundland. This right here is the Anglican Church. It is the oldest Anglican parish in North America. So this church itself was built in 1847. During the Great Fire of 1892, people were panicking to save their most valuable possessions. So they put them all into this church, thinking it would be safe because it's a stone building. But at the time, people would basically fasten windows to the stone window frame by using molten lead. The fire was so hot that it melted the lead, causing the molten lead to fall into the church, igniting everything inside the church on fire. So the church was destroyed, but the stone structure remains, and they were able to easily rebuild. I mentioned the Great Fire of 1892. This is one of the only structures in the main fire area that survived the fire. So this was the Union Bank building at the time. And the Union Bank building had these metal shutters at the top of every window, and they installed them to protect against theft, so no one could break the window, hop in the bank, and steal the bank's funds. So when the fire was broke out and people were running for their lives, they closed the bank as they would any other day by closing the shutters. And those metal shutters prevented the fire from going into the building, protecting the structure from the fire itself. So this is the last stop on the tour, and we're going to talk about the Great Bank Collapse. Basically, in 1894, there was the Great Bank Collapse. And we're going to talk about the financial system of the time. So essentially, at this time, there were basically fishermen, there were merchants, and there were the banks. So in the spring, the fishermen would borrow from the merchants and get everything needed for the season on credit. And then they would fish all summer, and in the fall, they would sell their fish back to the merchant, and then they would essentially eliminate their credit or even earn some money back. In a bad year, the fishermen wouldn't be able to get enough cod to sell back to the merchant, and so the merchant extended further credit to the fishermen in order to help them, fish again next year. The merchants understood that the fishermen needed credit in order to be able to produce any sort of cod in the fall. And so often the merchants had very big loans themselves to the banks. At this time, there were 3 banks in Newfoundland. There was the Newfoundland Savings Bank, which was owned by the government. There was the Commercial Bank and the Union Bank. The Commercial Bank and the Union Bank, they were both issued currency that was backed by the bank. And this was most of the currency that was available in the country at the time. So in December of 1894, a man named Henry Hall died. And he was an English financier that extended a loan to the Commercial Bank of Newfoundland. And when he died, his family wanted to shore up accounts, which was pretty normal at the time. And so they went to the Commercial Bank of Newfoundland and they said, we need you to pay this loan and repay the loan. And so the Commercial Bank said, well, we don't have enough money for this. So they went to the merchants. And that year, the price of cod was really low. So the merchants were saving the cod, hoping to sell it in the new year when the price was higher to get more money for it. And so the merchant said, all we have is codfish. That's all we can pay you with. And the merchants knew they couldn't go to the fishermen because the fishermen just finished fishing cod and they didn't have any extra money they already repaid their credit for the year. So basically, the Commercial Bank went back to the associates of Henry Hall and said, here's all we have, and the Commercial Bank closed. After that, there was a run on the banks. People were panicking trying to get their money out before the Union Bank closed. But the Newfoundland Savings Bank had an extremely large deposit. They went in first, got the deposit out of the Union Bank, and the Union Bank then closed. So now it's December of 1894, and it's just days before Christmas. All the currency that is circulating in the country was backed by 2 banks that are now closed. And so people have no currency. Merchants will not accept the currency that exists. And people have to resort back to bartering in order to pay for things like heating oil, food, basic necessities. And people were panicking. There was actual chaos in the street. People were rioting, people were looting. It was absolute pandemonium here in St. John's. And it wasn't until December 29th that the government was able to get funds to back the Union Bank and Commercial Bank dollars that were in circulation. Thankfully, what happened was the Canadian banks came in to Newfoundland and they set up their own branches here. And they created the Newfoundland dollar. And knowing that the people in Newfoundland would have a hard time trusting a currency backed by a bank, they created the Newfoundland dollar and backed it by the Canadian dollar. So it was essentially the Canadian dollar with a new face on it. And this was the currency used all the way up until 1949 when Newfoundland joined Canada. But can you imagine, like 19 days over Christmas and you have no money and no one has money? So that is the end of my tour, leaving it on a very happy note.
Well, folks, there you have it. That's an episode of GaleForceWins. Amber, you've brought us an incredible look into the history of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I know you said you ended it on a somber note, but you know what? It struck me is the resilience of Newfoundlanders.
Oh, 100%.
Incredible challenges, but they've persevered. Any final words?
It was great having you here. I hope you learned something.
Well, we learned something,
I'm glad.
and we are very proud of you. You are going to have an amazing summer, and even today, what is the date today? May
22nd.
May 22nd. There's been tourists around, so
it's exciting.
Yeah, you're off to a great start, Amber. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I hope to see all of you on tour.
Once again, how do you get a hold of you?
All right, so my Instagram, Facebook are Come From Away Adventures, and my Gmail, email me at comefromawayadventures@gmail.com.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to GaleForceWins. That's GaleForceWins, WINS.com.